Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of A Cup of Joe. My name is Joe Escobedo, and with me on the show is Chad Sotelo. Thanks for being on the show, Chad.
Good to be here, Joe. Thanks for having me.
So Chad is the general manager of Electrolux in the Philippines. And so for those of you who are not familiar, I actually interviewed Chad when I was at Forbes. And so this is kind of a follow-up on that. You gave some very good insights, but I think today we're going to be talking about a little bit about, doing business in the Philippines. You're in transition from, marketing to now a general manager role. And also want to get your thoughts on, positioning a, premium brand in a price-sensitive market. So first off, last time we spoke, you talked about the, one of your biggest challenges was understanding your customer. So has that changed since since we last met a couple of years ago?
Absolutely not, Joe. And in fact, with what's been happening, it becomes a lot more critical than ever to ensure that the brand and the business survives. So much has changed with the consumer in the past 3 to 4 months, and it's been amazing to see how consumers have quickly adjusted to things that we thought in the Philippines in particular that would take a couple of years, if not a decade, to change, like e-commerce for one. Like e-commerce literally exploded in industries that previously were just an afterthought, appliances being one of them. So it's a lot more critical now, especially since we have a lot less resources, as companies and consumers start crimping down and start saving on putting in your resources into few things that really count. So getting to know your consumers faster is a lot more important now than it used to be, and it was already important prior to that.
That's a very good point. You mentioned kind of the rise of e-commerce, particularly most recently with COVID. What are some of the ways in which you are, finding out more about your customer during these times where they're spending more time online, they're making more purchases online? What are some of the ways that you or the team are, better getting these customer insights?
Well, given that face-to-face restrictions are currently in place, even with the partial lockdowns, we've come to rely a lot on social media, obviously. We tend to have a lot more in-depth conversations now with people who comment, with people who send direct messages. For the people who do call our contact center for after-sales service, we try to take advantage of these opportunities where people reach out to us to ask a few questions to gauge sentiment. I've also made it a habit, because one of the changes that have happened in the Philippines is that a lot of virtual stores have popped up through messaging apps like Viber, for example, WhatsApp, and Facebook Messenger communities. And it's a hotbed of, real-time local community transactions. And it's a fantastic place for you to pick up some, good insights on what people are buying, why. It's also interesting to see on, how people, contrary to perception, are willing to pay a little bit more of a premium for things that offer convenience and safety in their point of view. So, we've come to rely a lot on these kinds of interactions, and it's been really helpful. It's a challenge because we're also used to the traditional way of knocking on people's doors, holding FGDs, holding in homes. But this new landscape is actually making it a little bit easier. The thing you have to contend with is the flood of information, because there's just so much happening out there that you really have to pick and choose where you go and who you listen to.
So I think two very good points from that, and I want to highlight, and then I want to hand it over to Mia. First of which was, you said, on social media, you're getting a lot of information from there. But not only are you gathering information, you are having a conversation with the customer, which I think very few brands do, or do it very effectively. So I think that's a great initiative. And also the customer service. I always preach about, the best insights come from your customer service teams. And I love that you guys are being proactive in terms of asking questions about their sentiment, their feelings right about now, such that, it helps you drive better marketing, better positioning, and just better empathy in general. So 2 points I really want to highlight, which I think are very, very good. I know Mia was very excited when you were mentioning a couple of things, so I want to hand it over to her. She had a couple of questions probably.
Sure.
Yeah, so I can just imagine the kind of information you're getting on social media. That's where all the Filipinos live, essentially, especially right now.
Exactly.
So how have you guys been filtering through this information, both in trying to make sure that the insights that you're getting is relevant to Electrolux and making sure that Electrolux is standing out in the minds of the consumers?
Well, one of the reasons why we find the conversations that we have coming in from an after sales or customer service perspective is because, at least based on my opinion, a conversation on customer service automatically eliminates any kind of perspective from a pre-purchase standpoint, right? So there's no discussion on price. It's all about the consumer experience. It's all about very real problems that people are facing. And like, for example, one of the most common problems we encountered in customer service is that during the lockdown was that people would call and say, my ref doesn't seem to be working because it's not cooling as much anymore. And when you probe, you find a consistent pattern that because of the rush of people to buy a lot of food, in anticipation of having no food for the next couple of weeks due to the lockdown, is that they've overstocked their freezer and that they've blocked a couple of the cold vents, and it just drops the performance of the refrigerator. So, we've counseled a lot of consumers that by just rearranging and rebalancing what's in their freezer versus what's in the refrigerator, the refrigerator performs well, and they've even passed on the information to their friends that don't have Electrolux refrigerators, and it works, right? So so that's why, for one thing, we do focus a lot on the after sales or the customer service questions, because that's where it really boils down to how the consumer experience is being delivered by our products, and that's really helpful. On social media, for those who have not purchased it yet, we really try to ask the folks, oh, what are you buying this refrigerator for? Or what are you buying this chest freezer for example? And then the pandemic really allows, as we've observed, consumers to focus on what in their minds are the most critical things. Like, for example, we had a lot of folks buy the front load washing machines because they don't want to risk going out and giving their clothes to laundromats, because one, they've been shut down, and two, even when they started to open, there was this fear that I don't like my clothes to be mixed up with other people's clothes because it might have the virus. Now, whether that's scientifically based, proven or not, it's a real concern by people. So we really try to drill down and ask consumers, what's the purpose of you buying this washing machine or this refrigerator? And we dovetail from that.
So once again, I think you bring up a very, very good point, which I want to highlight is, I speak with a lot of marketers and they think that, marketing and the messaging has to be very sexy and all of this. But I think you bring up a very good point, a very beautiful example of just addressing people's questions or challenges around, the issues with performance of the fridge, which is obviously right now, like you said, people are overbuying. So they're packing their fridge in too much. So this is one thing that you said is not something that, is super, it's like super sexy, but it's like super practical. It's answering something that is a major issue with them. So I love that example that you just shared with us. Anything?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. In fact, one of the plain guidelines we've used and during the lockdown is that all of our brand activities have to be useful, meaningful, or relevant, or a combination of the three. Like, I've come from marketing, and we've had those campaigns before, which are all about the long-term brand, the brand purpose, which are very important. But in a lockdown situation and in a pandemic situation, we strive to be useful, relevant, and meaningful, and it's paid off in spades, because the interactions that we've been getting on the little content that we've been able to put out has really been quite good. So that's the simple guideline that we've been using. So far, it's been working for us.
No, I think it's great. Like I said, it's simple, but then it's powerful as well. So I love that you've implemented that. A couple of different things because I want to talk about is you mentioned kind of your transition because you come from a marketing background, now taking over a general manager role. What was the biggest transition or learning from making that jump?
It's fighting the urge to not be a duplicate head of marketing. when I was transitioning into this role, I spoke with my mentor, and I asked the question, so what are going to be the challenges that I'll be facing? And he's like, you're going to be tempted to write a marketing brief. You're going to be tempted to write the script of the storyboard, or to give input to a 15-second commercial. That for me was the biggest challenge, because you spend so much time in marketing, you've developed your own certain style of doing things, and my marketing team actually did say, we're a bit scared, Chad, that you'd micromanage us, and which really put things in perspective for me, because I hate being micromanaged, but there is this real temptation to really put your foot in and say, I think this is the way we should be doing things. So it's the biggest challenge I've had transitioning from marketing to general management is really letting go, being able to treat them the way I would treat any other of the functions, which is to give direction, to give support, ask what help they need, and then get out of their way. That's been the biggest challenge so far.
I think that's a good lesson for any leader, any entrepreneur. I think I face the same thing because, I love writing. If I could, I would write all the social copy for everything in my, my company. But it just doesn't make sense anymore. It's not feasible for me to do that. It's not the most productive use of my time. So, I work with very, very smart folks like Mia who, are far better than I am. And so I think that's one of the advantages of working with smart people is, like you said, hire them, groom them, and then let them do what they want, because ultimately that gives you more time to focus on other areas, which, probably more important or crucial to the business. So very, very good point there. And Mia, Mia, do you want to jump in?
I'm smiling right now because I love how you're both talking about this kind of building an honest relationship, trusting your people, because I feel like I personally think that's so important in leaders. And I wanted to ask, like, how do you think, what do you think is the role of leaders now in creating this kind of culture of trust and championing engagement across organizations and with your direct people?
It's and it's also been a really good learning experience for me, because when I really forced myself to let go, it's really an experience of learning on how new things are being done now. Like, I've been in marketing since 2006, and my team is significantly younger than me, but the way they tackle the marketing problems that still happen until now is quite different and quite amazing, and more effective than how I used to do it. So it's also been a really good learning experience, and it really drives home the point that just let your people go and support them. They'll do fantastic work, and you learn it the same way.
Yeah, no, I think that's, once again, great lessons for any entrepreneur or business leader. Another thing I want to get your thoughts on, you talked about it earlier, is right now people are willing to pay a premium for convenience. But has that always been the case? I know, trying to, pitch or market a premium product in the Philippines, has that always been the case where it's been very easy to sell it, or has there been some price sensitive challenges you faced in the past?
Well, the Philippines is still a very price sensitive market. We still have, in the appliances industry, we still have a significant portion of our business in the what we call the semi-automatic or the manual machines, right? Like, washing machines that aren't, in the fully automatic range. And that's because of a certain price point. So that's always going to be a challenge. But supporting that is the fact that the middle class, so to speak, has been growing quite fast and quite well. So you have a segment of the population that has a slightly higher chunk of disposable income. And what we found is that the market in the Philippines goes for value, and how they define value has changed from being merely a price point discussion to what's in it for me standpoint. Like, I have $200 with me right now, for example. And if you're gonna offer me something that's priced at $2 and $250, then convince me that the $50 is worth it. There's a segment of the population that will say, I can't go beyond 200, and that's fine. But there's a growing segment of the population that says, I have 200, but I might be willing to chip in an extra $50. If you convince me it's worth it. And that's where the challenge lies, right? A lot of times we just keep on communicating new features, new products. But what we've discovered is to convince the people that are willing to shell out an extra $50 is what's in it for me means how does it make my life simpler? How does it make my life better? And the appliances industry has been a little bit slow in catching up to this, communication shift, so to speak, but we are seeing it now. So the market is always going to be price challenged. Like it's going to be difficult to sell $1,000 appliance versus like 250, 300. But there are a lot of opportunities to drive it. And, it's been working well, not just for us, but for everyone actually.
No, it's a very good point. I think not just in the appliance field, I work with a lot of major tech companies, and it's the exact same thing. They focus so much on the products and the features that they forget about the actual benefits, or as you rightly said, what's in it for the consumer. So that'll, I guess, like you said, make the shift between giving up the extra $50 when they see the additional benefit that's going to add to their lives, like making it simpler or saving time, or as you said, convenience. So all these different elements can add to value.
And I think it also helps that, in appliances, the usage of the product is expected to last for about 5 to 10 years. So, for example, in refrigerators, when people want to buy a small refrigerator, our messaging goes around the fact of, well, this is going to be a 5 to 10 year purchase. If you anticipate that you'll have kids already in 5 to 10 years, then wouldn't it be better for you to invest in a slightly larger refrigerator so you won't have to worry about it? So it's these kinds of messaging that seems to resonate well because it's anchored on a real life need, even if it's in the future, but people can relate to that. So that's how we go about it, rather than, well, we have the best technology in the refrigerator that allows you to keep your food fresh. That's important, but what resonates more is when you attach it to a real life stage or an anticipated life experience. So that's how we've been doing it so far.
I think it's a beautiful analogy. I'm thinking in the back of my mind how we could apply it to the business as well, because we kind of run a premium kind of operation as well. And I love the idea that you're thinking about it from a longer term perspective. Like if you're going to own this for 5 to 10 years, like wouldn't you want to get something a little bit nicer? It's going to last you. You're going to be happy with, not going to break down. You don't have to call customer service. So I think that's a beautiful way of putting it, putting yourself in their shoes to really add the additional benefit over a longer term period. I'm curious, how does that play in terms of messaging as well? Because if it's, every 5 to 10 years, you're going to get maybe a small percentage of people who are ready to buy versus a larger percentage of people who are existing customers who may buy in a year or two. How does that kind of dictate some of your marketing and sales activities?
Well, the nice thing about the Philippines is that from a penetration standpoint of, the fully automatic, the latest technology, so to speak, of appliances, we're not there yet. Like, based on the latest data that we have, for example, fully automatic washing machines front load only have a penetration rate of about 30 to 35%. So there's a huge segment of the population that is either on those semi-automatic or manual ones. And you also have this belief in the Philippine market that there are some things that you really just need to hand wash. So using that as an example, it allows us to tailor fit who we're targeting and our messaging. So if we're targeting someone who's using a competitive front load washing machine and is looking to replace it because it's been damaged, for example, or they've had a bad customer service experience in the other brands, then that's one entire messaging track that can happen. The other one is, someone who is moving from a semi-automatic or a top load to a front load. So it's an upgrade experience, right? And that upgrade experience can be, my old machine is 5 years, I need to upgrade, or I just got married, it's my first appliance to buy. I used to use a machine at home that my mom helped me out. So lots of different but real scenarios on how the messaging and the marketing activities can be adjusted to. And again, given the fact that the penetration of appliances in the Philippines is not as high as our other countries, it just gives us a whole range of, messaging tracks that we can use at this point. And honestly, the challenge a lot of times is not going out of your consistent messaging because, you're so tempted to change the message just because it's, you want something new. But again, consistency in the message and in the approach is going to be great, because you sell something, I sell something to you, Joe, today. Chances are in 3 to 4 years, you'll probably have an issue with either what I sold you or in another thing in your kitchen, let's say your stove, that I can potentially reach out to you. So, messaging after the sale, keeping that relationship alive is very important to appliances, because we have a 5 to 10 year life range. So the messaging has so many facets that we can tack on to, again, which are based on real life consumer experiences.
So once again, I love the way you think. It's very, very practical. I want to highlight a couple of things when I hand it over to Mia. But two things, I think the first of which you talked about is consistency. I think it takes a lot of discipline for a brand, especially the size of Electrolux, to be very consistent in terms of messaging. I see a lot of brands who are kind of flip-flopping all over the place, and you don't really know what they stand for. And like you said, when you have a customer who's a long-term one, and you're looking to renew them in 5-10 years, or cross-sell and upsell, I think that messaging is extremely important. There's another thing you mentioned at the beginning, which I thought was very, very good too. It slipped through my mind. I'll hand it back to Mia first, and then I'll jump back in.
Yeah, Joe, I like that you pointed out the consistency of messaging, because I agree that I feel like that's very important to help people keep the messaging in mind. But what I love about it is how Electrolux is translating this consistent messaging into different human experiences, so that people who are going through different phases in life can relate to that messaging in the ways that they're experiencing it. And I think that's so important, because you're right. In the Philippines, because people are so price sensitive, and because maybe certain appliances last long, they want to get the most out of their appliances. These experiences are what's going to speak to them. And I thought that was brilliant.
Actually, yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think Mia did a much better job of articulating it than I did. But I think one thing that I want to highlight is a lot of brands have like these personas they develop, and they sound a little bit generic and fluffy, and they're not super helpful. And I love the way that you explained it, like someone who's going from an upgrade and maybe they're getting married or whatever that transition to life is. I think going back to Mia's point, it's actual human experience versus like someone you see, some fictional character that you're drafting up and it has all these attributes, but it doesn't really, paint a picture for the marketing, sales, and customer service teams in terms of who this customer actually is. So once again, I love the very practical way in which you think about marketing. It's simple, but it's very powerful. So I think a lot of marketers should pay note and listen to how Chad explains it, because I think it's a beautiful way of articulating it.
No, thank you. And it's really learning. It's a good learning experience for me, because a lot of what we've been doing in Electrolux is obviously benchmarked on Swedish cultural values. There's a strong focus on experiences, being practical yet innovating at the same time. And sustainability from a Swedish standpoint is not just a byword, but it's literally part of everything that we do. So which is why the experience has been so great for me, because I've learned a lot in my previous experiences as a marketing guy, and along comes this this brand called Electrolux, which kind of flips over and incorporates a lot of the things that I learned. So it's been an amazing journey so far.
Yeah, and that's a very good point in terms of, like you said, translating some of the Swedish values to like the Philippines market. I'm guessing there's some overlap. You talked about things like sustainability. Is that how you would kind of transition between like a global brand and making it a bit more local for the Philippine audience?
Well, yes, but obviously, as we talk, let's say sustainability. Sustainability means a lot of different things in Europe, in Asia, in the United States, and even within Asia. It's a whole range of cultures. Southeast Asia would be different on it versus Northeast Asia. What we've discovered from a Southeast Asia standpoint is sustainability is obviously tied in a lot more to health. With what you take into your body through food. We're a very food-based culture. We have a lot of family gatherings that's all around food. So the taste experience is very critical when it comes to that, tying that into clean water as well. Air quality has always been an issue in Asia, in particular countries, but it's a growing concern. So, taking the Swedish and the Electrolux core values of sustainability and bringing that to life in the Philippines is not going to be easy, because one, we have to really capture what that means for Filipinos, not just for Southeast Asia. And secondly, there's a lot of, it's a paradox for me because a lot of consumers are looking for brands that drive sustainability. But there's also a lot of distrust from consumers when they see brands talk about it, because they say, you guys are just saying that because it's a marketing thing and it's a trend nowadays, right? So bringing it back is, how do we make the sustainability, part of Electrolux to be relevant to the consumer, to be useful, and to be meaningful? Because again, if it's not useful, meaningful, or relevant, then sustainability will just, it'll go over their heads and they'll ignore it. So that's a challenge and not easy at all, but that's why we're here.
Once again, very pragmatic explanation. If I just recap, you talked about, sustainability is something that can be applied to a global level, but at each region, even sub-region, look at Asia, look at Southeast Asia, you really have to understand what does it mean for that local audience. So you give an example of Southeast Asia, food is massive. And so, making it relatable to food, it makes it easier to understand. If you talk about other things like we talk about in Europe, there's, like you said, there's going to be a disconnect between how people understand it. It's the same concept, it's the same umbrella concept, but the way you explain it to someone in Europe versus, Southeast Asia has to be very different. And I love that, that understanding, once again, that the human context of, food, family is huge in Southeast Asia. So how do you relate it to that to make it very easy for them to comprehend?
Yeah, exactly. And just closing off that, and this circles back to the first question and what we talked about in our previous discussion, is that's why it's very critical to really know your consumer, right? Like, it sounds like a cliche, but with all of these things that's happening, if you don't listen to the consumer, then everything's just going to fly over their heads. And we all know that a lot of marketing budgets have been cut. So, the best way to make your marketing budget really work for you is just listen. And, it's been a challenge for everyone. It really pays off when you do.
Yeah, no, I think one more question I want to wrap up, because that's a very good point in terms of prioritization. Now with marketing budgets getting cut, how do you prioritize where you put your budgets? Now as the finance guy as well.
That is the toughest thing to do, when you discuss marketing budgets, because marketing, as always, has been a mixture of having short-term immediate impact and long-term brand building. And a lot of times, as painful as a discussion it may seem, a lot of activities have to be cut because you need to prioritize short-term, right? So from, I personally have two ways to prioritize. One is marketing activities. One is, do any of them, really make us useful, meaningful, and relevant today? And if it's not today, but it's, useful, meaningful, and relevant next year or the next 1 to 2 years, I would generally deprioritize that one. So one. And two is making sure that the brand is just out there, but in the most impactful way, right? Ordinarily in normal times, you'd have a budget on driving a lot of search marketing, a lot of social-based marketing. You'd have tactical television or radio. Nowadays, it's just making sure that using occasional bursts of activity in the most relevant context, how can you be present in or how can consumers continue to be aware of you, especially since our number one driver of awareness, which is retail, is not really a viable aspect nowadays, right? So it's a bit of a vague answer, but that's how we generally look at it. Obviously, there's no playbook to this in that sense that, speaks of it, but that's how we look at it. So we prioritize useful, meaningful, and relevant now, today, in the next couple of months. We deprioritize a little bit. That's what's going to happen for next year and the next 2 years. And it's being ensuring that you're aware, you're present in the mind of the consumer by using specific bursts of activity in very relevant touch points.
No, I think it's a it is very difficult to explain, but I think it is helpful, like you said, to prioritize what's going to have the most impact today. Maybe deprioritizing, especially now when the economy is kind of down, and so a lot of industries have been hit hard. They're focusing on maybe the short-term goals, but I guess hopefully once the economy picks back up, then the long-term initiatives still carry a bit more weight. Would you say?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Agreed.
Well, wonderful. I think that was everything. Anything last you want to add in there?
I think I just have one last question, because I looked into Chad a little bit before this conversation of ours, and I saw one of the things that he posted online on how he is a brand builder, and he encourages people to be a brand builder regardless of function. What does that mean to you?
Uh, I've always had, you know, success in whatever work I'm doing. As I mentioned to you both, when we keep the consumer in mind, right? And a lot of people in companies nowadays think that keeping the consumer in mind is the job of marketing or product. But when you are able to get the other functions that are traditionally inward looking, like finance, supply chain, even HR, for example, when they start thinking of, you know, having the consumer in mind, it changes the conversation. Like, you know, again, using a generic but very relevant example, e-commerce. A lot of people think that the way to win in e-commerce is having the right product at the great price and making some noise on social media, on you know, on social media and digital. And that's very important. But what we've learned, and this is not a secret because I got it from Amazon's book, The Everyday Store, 99% of the challenge on exploding your e-commerce business is on the last mile experience, right? It's the moment that you pay, but it's getting the product as quick as you can from your store or your warehouse to the consumer's hands. And that typically is where 99% of the problems come. That's where cancellations happen. And quite frankly, that kind of a problem can only be solved if it's led by the supply chain team. So when we had that conversation with the supply chain team, and the supply chain team was started to think of it from a consumer perspective on, I want to get my refrigerator right away, right? Why should I wait 7 to 10 days on it when my food's melting? It changes the conversation. And then they start to become brand builders. So that's why I said, you know, I love making brand builders out of everyone, regardless of the function, because I don't think marketing has or should have the monopoly of thinking about it from a consumer standpoint. If every function starts thinking about it that way, then that's how you create a lot more value. And again, this pandemic has accelerated digital transformation, so to speak. And you know, but even before that, when people start thinking about the consumer, then you start questioning also, do I really need to do all of these things if it doesn't add value? So that's what I meant.
That's good. This has been a wonderful experience. I really appreciate you sharing your time, Chad. I've learned a lot. I'm sure Mia feels probably the same way.
Yes, definitely.
Thanks so much, you two. I really enjoyed this conversation, and you know, I look forward to watching all the other types of, you know, content that you both pull out, Joe, as well. Thank you very much for this chance.
Thank you so much. So last question, Chad, is where can people get in touch with you or find out more about you?
Well, I'm on social media. So on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, it's all Chad Sotelo. You know, my email address is also chadsotelo at Gmail. So shoot me a note, drop me a tweet, send me a message on Facebook, and I'll be happy to, you know, have a conversation with you all.
There you go. Get in touch with Chad. Follow him. You'll learn a ton. Thank you so much, Chad. And if you're watching, please feel free to share this with your fellow leaders or anyone who might find this helpful. Otherwise, thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Take care, guys.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.